Hey, what's going on, lovely people? Today I just wanted to start listing my top 25 favorite video games overall as of right now and talking about my favorite aspects of each. Today we'll be going over number 25 to 20, next video will be up to number 15, and so on. Now, I'm the type of obsessive nerd who has been keeping track of every game I've ever played, so I have over 320 games at this point that I've played and ranked, from everything from my favorite to my least favorite, so don't get mad if something is like 24th or 25th in this list. Keep in mind, just being anywhere in this top 5 means that I enjoy said game more than 93% of all other games I've ever played. Okay? Okay. Starting off with number 25, we have Halo Wars 1. And for those curious, Halo Wars 2 is just barely out of my top 25 at 26th. And I constantly flip back between the two over which is my favorite, but for right now, I lean slightly towards the first. Honestly, I'm just so grateful this game exists because I always had a huge amount of respect for the RTS genre, but honestly, I can never find a game in the genre that I enjoy myself to appreciate it a little more, you know? I'm not sure if it's because they made it really intuitive compared to other RTS games for myself, or just that my love for the Halo franchise made me basically outweighed whatever lack of enjoyment I would get from playing an RTS game. But yeah, thank you, Halo Wars. Because of you, even a non-RTS player like myself, can get a little bit of love and respect for the genre. So thanks for that. Despite being a huge Pokemon fan, the only one that came in the top 25 here is at number 24, and it isn't even a game I made by a studio working for Nintendo. Pokemon Uranium. From the look slash vibe to the music to what, in my opinion, is genuinely the most moving main story in any Pokemon game I've ever played to this day, I don't see where you can go wrong with it. And to give you a perspective of how notable that is, I've played so many games in this franchise, the Pokemon franchise, that even by combining similar versions into one spot on this list, i.e., Gold, Silver, and Crystal versions all taking up one slot instead of like three, there's still 20 spots on my list that Pokemon games take up, and yet this game ranks above all of them for me. So that's saying something. Speaking of Nintendo franchises I enjoy and being the only representative from a series this high on my list, at number 23 is the only Prime trilogy we're going to talk about today, which is controversially Prime 3. While I can see where the majority of the cases for the first two being the favorites of others, I quite honestly am just coming from a very different, untraditional approach, as Prime 3 was actually my very first Metroid game I ever played. And thus, rather than it feeling like, for a lot of players, they felt like the devs made Prime 3 slightly easier than the rest of the franchise, I had the opposite experience, and since I started with Prime 3 and I would go to other franchises, not other franchises, other games in the franchises, I just got smacked with this huge difficulty increase, especially when it comes to the 2D Metroid games. Also, one thing I do think even people who prefer the other ones will concede to, getting work done with the other space pirates was a cool idea, and the music is just amazing. The Metroid franchise has some of the best OSTs in all of gaming. Me and many others would agree with that, and I, along with many others, would hold this up as the best score in a franchise of constant greatness, as far as soundtrack is concerned at least. Up at number 22, we have Devil May Cry 5. I've always been a passive fan of the franchise ever since I saw my friend kicking ass in DMC on his PS2 way back in elementary school at his place, and it's one of the few franchises in gaming I've enjoyed for over a decade that is both still active and isn't experiencing some sort of quality dip in my eyes as the franchise continues to be that, gameplay-wise, story-wise, aggressive monetization, any of that fuck-ups isn't really happening too much here. I mean, DMC5 just in general, it's a great showcase that modern gaming doesn't have to suck. It doesn't butcher any of its characters or design unnecessarily, nor is it in an identity crisis of trying to either change everything or seemingly nothing at all. The gameplay satisfyingly builds on the previous entries as well, etc, etc. While DMC 3 and 1 have the better OSTs overall in my opinion, DMC 5 definitely has some good songs too, and listen, I know this is shallow, but honestly, bless the devs for finally giving us a hot guy character in gaming. V is hot as fuck, man. And my bias has been longing for a guy like a character that has both cute vibes and cute looks for a while now. So yeah, I appreciate that. Number 21 is a very similar situation to Halo Wars, with Fallout 2 as the top turned down base gameplay is just so unimmersive for me and not something I enjoy yet when I'm playing Fallout 1, and especially Fallout 2, which, is here and made my top 25. They They both have such inspired atmospheres that I could get past what is genuinely too much of a hurdle for me to properly enjoy for any of its contemporaries. The art style is cool as hell, the factions and the interactivity is just always so fun to engage with, and honestly the music is just at a whole different level compared to what came later in the franchise. Not to say that later Fallout games don't have music I enjoy, but what Mark Morgan composed for the original games, even as someone who came into the franchise via the Bethesda games, and beat all of those games entirely before even opening the original two, it still, even to me, just sounds like peak Fallout sound design. Lastly, at number 20, we have the other Fallout game that got into my top 25, which is Fallout New Vegas. Now, honestly, between these two videos that I'm hopefully showing up on the screen right now, I've pretty much already covered a lot of what I love about this game already, so go check those out if you want a deep dive. I don't really see any point in repeating everything I said in those videos, but to summarize, the player choice, factions, and just world building in general is such a great showcase in game design that future developers should look to it for study. That's Halo Infinite, which really does a great job correcting the absolute mess caused by the unnecessarily bringing back Cortana, all of that complete mess in Halo 5 that caused. And the trio, the chief and the weapon and the pilot, they're just really easy to root for, and they're written exquisitely. The cutscene in particular that I'm going to show here just makes me tear up every single time.
You should leave me here with the rest of the carpets.
We all fail. We all make mistakes. It's what makes us human.
I'm sorry, Chief, but how have you ever failed?
I should have protected Cortana. Stopped everything from going wrong. I failed her. I will not fail you.
Chief. Wait. We're going to make it. We have to.
This is all I've got.
It's all we need. Our only way home is straight through the heart of the Banished.
We need you.
We can fix this.
Together.
Of course we can. Together.
In addition, the art style is looking great with everything from vehicles to weapons to buildings, etc. They're all looking just perfect, chef's kiss. While admittedly I only gave multiplayer a week when I got the game before I stopped playing it, the campaign is just so stellar it truly deserves to be this high because it genuinely brought me that. Next is one of the most iconic and deservedly praised games of all time, Super Metroid at 18th. While admittedly I find it very challenging and frustrating because I'm not that great at it, I still am in awe of what the developers managed to make on a console that came out in 1990. The music is awesome, the story is really engaging, and my goodness, the art style choices are perfection. Honestly, parts of this game look more beautiful than AAA games released nowadays. Like, is it just me or does this, despite not the increase in graphical quality for this other game to the other side, just not look so much more bland and uninteresting? I don't know, maybe it's just me, but that's genuinely how I feel. My 17th favorite is Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2. Admittedly, I never played the first until less than half a year ago, so I grew up with the second game, and that's how I got introduced to all the great gameplay and role-playing mechanics that the series has to offer. And the second game's story, in my opinion, was just really a step up from the previous game. Just how it questions and shatters its own series in its fascinating way is just so engaging and fun to play around with. Really great game that I highly recommend you play if you haven't already. After that, we've got my 16th favorite, Halo Reach. While admittedly sandbox-wise, I think it's on the weaker side of the Bungie Halo games, and I think a lot of their decisions around elite playability and Spartan abilities led to bad choices for the franchise further down the road as they pursued those routes further, I still love this game. I still remember the day I got it, just tearing up just a little bit, just from the opening main menu and intro cutscene alone. It was just all so beautiful. The visual art style of Reach is just something I adore. The menu arts were awesome. The Spartan armors are the best in the series still, in my opinion. And of course, you have Marty O'Donnell and Mike Salvatore composing your soundtrack, so as always, just absolutely brilliant. And the cutscenes are just an absolute masterclass that all other games should aspire to. both on a musical level, narrative level, and on a cinematography level. Just perfect. Back to another Star Wars game, and it may get some flack for ranking this just one place above Halo Reach, but Star Wars Republic Commando is honestly my 15th favorite. Basically, the deciding factor between the two is the squad mechanics. This game is roughly on equal levels with how much I enjoy any individual aspect of it compared to Halo Reach, so, well, outside of the music, so like art style, level design, main story, stuff like that. But having more mechanics for squad-based actions and gameplay just makes the sense of being part of this gritty team taking on impossible missions where you have to rely on each other to get through every little bit. It just makes it a little bit more potent than what Reach is able to do, as you're always playing Noble 6 with no such squad command. Up first is Eco, as my 14th favorite game of all time. It's a well-deserved cult classic that's famous for influencing many developers after its release for good reason. While admittedly the playability isn't very strong for me, the story and how Team Eco intertwine their story with game mechanics more than made up for it. I mean, the concept of holding a girl's hand and trying to rescue her from a castle certainly wasn't a new concept even to video games, but expressing that story via the fail state being forced only on Yorda, having to hold down the hold button that keeps her hand held. That sentence didn't make sense, but you know what I mean. The slight shuddering of the controller as you grab each other's hands, the enemies primarily targeting her over you, and so much more certainly was new, and it was a great inspiration for other developers to further integrate their own stories with gameplay. Just ahead is another Team Eco game at 13th, Shadow of the Colossus. This game does many similar principles well, such as the aforementioned integration of story and gameplay, just from more of a David versus Goliath kind of tale with a twist rather than like escaping the castle sort of trope. Despite it being vastly more devoid of life than most games, the Forbidden Lands are just admittedly so much fun to explore, and even more fun to explore than the castle in Eco, admittedly, which the castle is pretty fun to explore, so that's saying something. The soundtrack is beautiful, the Colossi are fascinating, and despite the overwhelming majority of its story going unanswered / left mysterious, which I typically hate when that much is left blank, I must admit I did genuinely enjoy it, and I still enjoy it even on repeat playthroughs. It's moving. At 12th is our third straight PlayStation exclusive for today, Sly 3 Honor Among Thieves. Interestingly enough, this was actually my first intro into the Sly series, and it quickly became one of my favorite franchises of all time. On a gameplay level, I don't see how anyone can make the argument this isn't the best of the original trilogy. Everything from Sly 1 and 2 was brought back, that was great. Plus you got disguises, and you could replay missions, and you got to play as other characters than the original trio. You even got mini games for multiplayer, which I remember having fun against my parents back in the day. And lastly, while we'll get eventually to my favorite story in the original trilogy in this top 25 list, spoiler, the story for Sly 3 is pretty damn compelling, and the plot of gathering new friends and people and former foes for this big job is certainly loads of fun, and as you travel level to level across the world, it's great. Plus, on a design and personality level, it's clear that this is really where Sucker Punch was like hitting their stride with getting everybody as cool as fuck all the time, every time. Next, we've got Halo 3 at 11th, just outside my top 10 personal favorites. Honestly, outside of the de-emphasis of the Arbiter and the elites in the campaign, I genuinely can't think of anything else in Halo 3 I dislike. The sandbox is my favorite in the series, the story is epic, the levels and skyboxes especially are gorgeous. As always with a Bungie Halo game, the soundtrack gets 100% 10 out of 10 for me. And the addition of Forge was the single biggest thing in all of Halo's multiplayer history, in my opinion, quite frankly. The first game with Forge and armor unlocks just created this environment where seemingly literally all of my friends were wanting to play Halo 3 together all the time online, and I don't regret those countless hours. Not at all. Finally for today, I'm putting Minecraft as my 10th favorite. Honestly, I considered not putting it in the series at all, as it is so much more sandbox dominant than all the other games this high up, but the fact that Minecraft has to make up like at least 40% of my total time spent playing multiplayer games online, whether it be console or PC, in my entire life, and the amount of time I've spent making and keeping up with friends on there is just too significant to ignore. I don't prefer its story or music over any of the other games it's ahead of, but yeah, it's really has been the most consistent multiplayer game for me, and honestly, just due to that alone, I just have so much more fond memories attached to it than most other games that if I'm gonna put it on this list, this is probably the appropriate point of where I would rank it at as far as how much love I have for the game. Because due to all that multiplayer and making a lot of friends and just building silly shit together, I have come to love this very simple game. Dino Crisis 2 slides in here as my 9th favorite and has been in my top 10 for as long as I can remember almost. I remember it being one of the first dozen or so games I played actually, so since I was so new to gaming, I found this game really quite difficult actually, ironically enough. Of course, now I can much more easily beat the game, and I'm also now well aware that it's actually the easiest in the series by far when it comes to difficulty. I mean, as a kid, my primary reasons for loving it so much were admittedly a bit shallow and primarily centered around it being a blend of exciting action gameplay and the coolest creatures in Earth's history, dinosaurs. However, while those things still hold true today, my main love for it is more so centered around its engaging story, characters, and pretty good overall soundtrack, with pieces like Three's Crowd in particular being especially burned into my memory. Up at 8th, we have an admittedly recent addition, as I only got the privilege to play this game less than a year ago, but Panzer Dragoon Saga more than deserves its place this high for me. Simply put, I think, as much as I think dinosaurs are the coolest beings or creatures to ever have existed, if we're counting mythological creatures, then dragons are even fucking cooler than dinosaurs, right? At least to me. And so when you have a whole franchise based on being a dragon rider, I will immediately catch some interest. And while I'm not typically a rail shooter fan, this series proves to be an exception to that. And given the RPG nature of Saga in particular, their unique battle system they made for this game is certainly my favorite turn-based combat system in all of gaming. I'm genuinely devastated it hasn't really caught on from what I could see. I mean, can you imagine how damn awesome it would be if, like, say, a Pokemon game controlled like this, where you could dynamically move to set points on the battlefield to fight these colossal bosses, or just any other turn-based RPG? Yeah, a lot of missed opportunities with that. At 7th, we have my favorite game from Team Eco, The Last Guardian. I'm so glad the team noticed how much the players, such as myself, felt a connection with aggro and made that their guiding principle in this game, because honestly, centering a game around such a precious and magical creature, plus building a connection with them, is like, unironically, a dream come true for me. And while many games try to invoke that feeling, no one has quite captured it like this game has. I mean, just fucking look at Trico being so precious. Just outside my top 5, we have Master Chief Collection at 6th. And while admittedly a good argument can be made that this is, like, on an objective level the best Halo game because it has 6 Halo games on it plus several additions, this list is subjective, and admittedly my subjective feeling around this game is influenced by the rough launch, plus honestly it just never feeling quite as active on multiplayer as it used to be back in the day, in particular when it comes to big team battle, which I still nowadays struggle to find games for. But with all that said, it has all the content of those 6 previous Halo games, Halo 1, 2, 3, 4, Reach, and ODST, several of which have already been previous on this top 25 list. In addition to several others in the series, it's fixed all of its most egregious errors since launch in my eyes, so yeah, despite me holding the slight critiques as justification for why I rank one Halo game above it, which we'll get to, and that game is in this collection, any lower than 6th would be like both a lie to you all and myself, right? After all, at this point, I've probably spent just as much time on MCC as I have on all the original releases on their consoles combined. And that's not to say that I didn't put tons of hours into those, because I remember unlocking everything. Like for Halo 3, I got every armor but recon unlocked, right? So it's not like I was passively playing those. I put a lot of hours into those. I mean, keep in mind though, MCC has come out nearly 10 years ago, and I switched over to it for the majority of my Halo gaming since that date. So, yeah, it makes up such a big portion despite me playing the other games that damn much. At 5th, and the final game we'll be talking about today, is Sly 2 Band of Thieves. While yes, earlier I said Sly 3 had my favorite gameplay, Sly 2 has the advantage both in story as well as campaign length. Both due to simply having more episodes than Sly 3, but also, unlike in the third games here, they kept the clue bottles around, which just combined to give you more things to do as far as new content is concerned, despite all the new additions that Sly 3 brought to the table. Again, those included replayability of missions, multiplayer mini-games, and being able to play as characters other than the main trio. While the first game of the original trilogy has my favorite soundtrack, I forgot to mention this during Sly 3, but I'll shout it out here along with Sly 2. Both Sly 2 and 3 certainly have some great tracks, especially all the overworld songs. And while I said Sucker Punch hit their stride with representing the whole cast of a game in Sly 3, in Sly 2 they gave us my favorite showing of the Cooper Gang in particular, as this game was really... It has this harrowing, dark, intense atmosphere for a rated E for everyone game, at least, via the Claw Gang's plot for world domination, restoration of clockwork via this giant light show of hate, effectively. It just really makes the feeling of saving the world at the end that much more powerful. Up to my 4th favorite now, and that'd be The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. Kind of like with the Sly series, I started out with the most recent release at the time with this series, and slowly worked my way backwards. So by the time I gave Morrowind a solid playthrough, I'd already been playing Skyrim for 5 years, but this game quickly surpassed that one as my new favorite in the series at the time. Admittedly not right away, the combat system and lack of voice acting definitely felt jarring at first, as no voice acting in an RPG I'm playing with was also a first for me with Morrowind. Yet just due to the depth of character creation in the world itself, that has fascinating magical design, I still to this day get the strong desire to want to explore and just travel across the game world more so than any other world I've had the privilege of exploring. Also, in my opinion, this game has had the best world building as far as in-game books are concerned, which for all lore nerds, a fan of the Elder Scrolls, and I include myself on that list, are always a very big deal when done right. In addition, unlike Oblivion or Skyrim, the world surrounding you as you read these books that fill you with all these wonder and ideas align with the potential of it, right? Like, it's hard for the sermons of Vivek, for example, to stick with you in Skyrim once you put it down and move on to your next task in this action-focused tundra of northern Tamriel. Whereas reading them in a game where you might fight and talk directly with this demigod of the people who lives in his temple keeps these interesting ideas at the forefront of your mind, even as you put the book down and move to the next task, per se. Because after all, there's always a possibility that your next task can feel as mind-bending and engaging as what you've just read in Morrowind, whereas the other games, it doesn't necessarily feel that way. At 3rd, the first of my top 3 is The Witcher 3. While at first this seems like an odd pick, as I just gave Morrowind essentially credit for being a more complex RPG than Skyrim, but first off, I actually really enjoy Skyrim, so being less complex doesn't mean I can't have fun in a game that's less complex, as I just said. But second, unlike in every Elder Scrolls game since Morrowind, in The Witcher 3, your decisions feel very impactful and are made more apparent to you in the world game itself. I think this is the case for a mix of 2 reasons. First off, by having more of its cast on an equal or higher level of authority/power than the player character in Skyrim and Oblivion, just the PC you create, whereas obviously in The Witcher 3 it's going to be Geralt. It makes the choices you guide them towards more meaningful. So in other words, if you can't force everyone to do what you want due to power/authority justifications, rather than them just being made invincible by the devs or whatever, every time you do influence an NPC's decision, it feels like they're either outright showing you gratitude, or that you accomplished something that is either atypical or noteworthy. Speaking of the cast and NPCs, the love the team put into every primary and ancillary character really goes beyond anything else I've seen in any storytelling medium. The clothing styles are brilliant and fitting for the context each is found in. The voice actors did stellar jobs across the board. The music feels so inspired by a lot of game OSTs that sometimes struggle with sounding, I guess, cheesy for lack of a better term when they try to mix in some traditional folk music of any culture. But like this did it really well. Thus, I really appreciate it when it's done right. And to both do it so well and expose me to a whole new culture of music I admittedly wasn't familiar with before playing this game, I gotta say, that's pretty awesome. Firmly my second favorite, and just barely edging out Morrowind as my favorite Elder Scrolls game of all time at the moment, is The Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall. Oh gee, where do I even start with this game? As someone who's only first played the game around 2.5 years ago and only switched over to the Unity version a year after that, even I can tell you, despite watching every second of this over 3.5 video essay on the game multiple times, even Jeweler had to skip over and summarize many aspects of this game because it's genuinely that colossal. Hell, you could probably make an entire channel just dedicated to Daggerfall analysis, honestly. And that is Daggerfall's biggest strength, its scope. Out of the over 320 plus video game worlds at this point I've thus far played, and despite the sprite-based nature of the assets, Daggerfall has the most realistic world I've ever seen, and it isn't particularly close. You don't have to imagine what the city and the lore is like, because in the game you get the actual city, all 700,000 plus civilians with various jobs and responses to questions included. In Skyrim or Oblivion, the world is so crap that a cross-country walk can take less than an hour or two. I've taken longer walks than that in real life for groceries. Whereas in Daggerfall, a cross-country road trip feels more daunting yet exciting because at over 33 real-life hours, it really is a pretty legit cross-country road trip. Also controversially, while by the time Skyrim comes around, there's enough of a soundtrack and stuff that I prefer the audio and sound design as a whole in that overall to Daggerfall, I've gotta admit, given how short the soundtracks of Oblivion and Morrowind are, despite them not having any tracks I dislike, unlike in Daggerfall, which does have a few I don't like, overall, I prefer the overall sound design to Daggerfall than all of their Elder Scrolls games, with Skyrim, of course, being the one exception. Finally, my number one favorite of all time is Halo 2. I mean, there's a reason I'm making a whole ass series just analyzing the game, right? I love it. Generally my favorite story in all of storytelling, my favorite soundtrack in all of musical composition, and who is genuinely my favorite character ever made in human history, and I genuinely mean that, as cheesy as it sounds, the Arbiter. My favorite multiplayer and campaign levels in any non-open world game, my favorite sandbox as far as looks and sound are concerned, and somehow, despite being definitely my favorite game since I first played it 17 years ago, when I started diving into the cut content of the game 2 years ago, I came to be baffled by the fact that somehow basically everything cut would have, in my opinion at least, made the game even better, which honestly would reach a level of awe and love that I don't even have the words to describe, quite frankly. I mean, honestly, my brain can't even focus on what else to say because there's so much to say. Long story short, in my eyes, Halo 2 is the pinnacle of storytelling and sound design in gaming that all games in all other genres should aspire to. That's finally it for the list. While of course you're free to give your opinions on my list, personally I'd be more interested to see your lists for your favorites. So head on down to the comments section if you care to share. I do writing and art commissions. Here's my email for that. And here is the channel's Twitter, should you wish to follow it. Love you all, and have a lovely day out there.